As spring sports get rolling, injuries top of mind for many student athletes and their parents. On this Mindful Monday, we're joined by Andrew Jagim, Director of Sports Medicine Research at Mayo Clinic Health System in La Crosse. Good morning, Andrew.
Good morning.
Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so it's an exciting time of year for a lot of parents and student athletes. What are some of the most common injuries you see when youth sports start back up?
Usually with injuries, we classify them as contact or non-contact related. The name kind of implies which one is which, and we actually see more non-contact injuries than we do kind of pertaining to direct hits or contact. And the reason being is we tend to see more overuse injuries, and that's kind of what fits into that category where the athlete is doing the same sport or the same motion over and over and over, and it tends to just increase that risk of injury for that arm or limb or whatever that involved kind of muscle group happens to be.
Okay, and so what can parents and students do to stay safe while they're out there?
The biggest thing is to kind of just be mindful of how much work or training you're doing for that particular sport or activity. So athletes that tend to specialize early, play that sport year-round, are at a much higher risk of some of those overuse injuries. And then we actually see issues on the other end of the spectrum where if you go from 0 to 100 kind of within the same week, you're also going to be at risk for kind of doing too much too soon, which kind of presents the same way as an overuse injury, just because the body or the muscle group or the tendons weren't accustomed to that level of loading. And again, then we see a higher risk of injury. So making sure they progress slowly as they come from an off-season to an in-season period can certainly help. And then also trying to limit the same sport, you know, being played year-round without any breaks in competition.
Right. Yeah. So talking about that, you know, I think the pressure is kind of bigger than ever. You know, club, travel teams, school teams, you see kids, they want to play year-round, or maybe they feel like they have to, or maybe they play different sports, and so it's always their season. What's your advice to kind of navigate that to avoid these overuse injuries?
It is hard. I have young kids in sports, so we're kind of living this right now. And again, there is that pressure of it. If you feel like you don't join a team, you're missing out on an opportunity to get better at that sport. But a lot of the research actually indicates that multi-sport athletes tend to have more success in the long term. And it's because their bodies are exposed to different movement patterns, so you develop different skill sets. You become a more well-rounded athlete that tends to kind of play a bigger role in long-term success. So even though you feel like you might be missing out in the short term, in the long term, it's, you know, what we see is kind of the best model for long-term athlete development, helping to reduce risk factors for some of those overuse injuries, and then really kind of just promotes a well-rounded athlete that, you know, tends to lead to better success down the road.
Right. Okay. So, you know, they maybe feel bad if they are taking a break, but just keep in mind, and they can do a different sport, right?
Yep, absolutely, and that's actually the ideal situation. Is, let's say you're a baseball player, instead of playing baseball year-round, throwing year-round, you want to take a break, give that arm some rest. In the meantime, you could play a sport like basketball or hockey where you're focusing on different movement patterns, different muscle groups are involved. You're developing different levels of speed, strength, and coordination, so that when baseball comes around, now you have a more diverse array of skill sets that could, you know, play a more positive role in your baseball performance the next season.
Okay, great. We're also seeing more girls getting involved in sports than ever. Are there any injuries that are more prone to female athletes, or what are you seeing there?
There are certain injuries. I would say ACL tears are probably the most common, that we see a much higher kind of prevalence in female athletes than males, anywhere from about 4 to 8 times higher prevalence in female athletes. And there's a multitude of factors that kind of play a role in that. Some of it's hormonal differences, some of it's, you know, the way their skeletal structure is developed, and it results in different movement patterns or kind of biomechanics of the sport itself. But then we also just see, from a historical perspective, female athletes maybe weren't as involved in strength conditioning programs at an earlier age, and maybe that plays a role as well, because they don't have that base level of strength and coordination that maybe tends to make them more susceptible to some of those injuries. So as female athlete sports get more and more popular, we're hoping that some of those injury gaps kind of tighten up, and we don't see those major kind of contrast in the injury rates between the two.
Okay, and one last thing I wanted to touch on. We talked about the physical. Mental is also a big thing in this. So what about burnout? What can student athletes do to prevent burnout? A
lot of it kind of comes back to that sport specialization. If you're doing the same thing year-round, you're in these high-level clubs, you're in these high-pressure, you know, team settings or tournaments all the time, that sport kind of becomes a job rather than a fun activity to do with your friends. And so again, mixing sports up throughout the year, doing different ones, or taking a time off and just letting kids be kids, letting them go play with their friends, play at the park, just do kind of normal physical activities that they should be doing, that is just really the best way to prevent that burnout. Just give them breaks, let them de-stress a bit, you know, pick up a new hobby or activity, and then hopefully they kind of refresh and have a new mindset come the next season, and then they don't have that level of burnout.
All right, great. So taking breaks and mixing it up, the key things there.
Yep, for both injuries and the burnout kind
Okay.
of side of things.
All right, Andrew Jagim, thank you very much for being here.
Absolutely.
Stay with us. We're back after this.